Welcome to the Basin Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber, and we have a guest today.
I'm Nick Allardice. I am here from GiveDirectly and excited to chat to you both today.
Let's get a bit of background. How did you come to be where you are, and what made you excited to get into this field?
Yeah, great question. The slightly extended story is both my parents were social workers and grew up in rural Australia. They were both social workers, and I think that's where I got my values from. But I think it's where I also got my interest in, trying to find scalable solutions to problems, because I watched them burn out over a few decades of, patching up a broken system and catching kids that fell through the cracks of a welfare system that wasn't really supporting them. And I was like, there's got to be a better way. So that was kind of step one of my journey. And then I think later on, I studied philosophy at university. I read Peter Singer. I really went down that rabbit hole, and seemed to me like drawing boundaries around how I should apply my values just around Australia seemed kind of stupid. And so that very much got me oriented around thinking about the world as a whole. I briefly flirted with a law degree. I did it, but seemed like a terrible way to make a difference in the world, and ended up getting involved in policy and political change for international development. And that gave me a sense of, hey, I can have an extraordinary sense of personal agency here. I worked on a campaign when I was young that I think pretty credibly ended up contributing to moving several $1 billion in Australia's aid budget. And my takeaway from that was, wow, like, holy shit, this might be the most impactful thing I've ever done. Or ever will do. It's going to be really hard to back up. And so that really oriented to me around scale. But at the same time, I got pretty disillusioned with the sector. I saw a lot of risk aversion. I saw a lot of bureaucracy. I saw a lot of, honestly, field opinions, people who just kind of wanted to do what felt good as opposed to what was actually going to work. That in many ways drove me away from staying in that space. And I ended up in tech, joining this company called change.org. I was interested in trying to scale political change. I'd had this transformative experience of working on political campaigns myself, but wanted to figure out how I could scale that even further in a really global way. And I saw technology as a way to do that. And so I spent almost a decade there doing a range of different things as we kind of grew. I joined it really early. I was maybe employee in the first maybe 10 employees, I think. And over the next 10 years, we kind of grew out the platform to be operational in 20 countries and have more than 50 million monthly users and sustainable and growing, and a big team of 400 plus and so on. And there's a lot of ups and downs along the way there, and learn a lot of hard lessons about what it takes to do things in the real world at scale. When I finished up as CEO there, I kind of played a bunch of roles where I took over as CEO from the founder. And when I finished up there, I was really taking a step back and thinking about how could I bring together the values that have always motivated me with some of the skills that I had built. GiveDirectly was a pretty amazing way to do that, a kind of intersection of technology and data with really directly supporting those worst off in the world, and in a really evidence-based and powerful way. So that's what led me to where I am.
That's awesome. That's kind of the reverse of mine. I read Peter Singer, in late high school, early college, and my wife's a social worker, and so I'm kind of seeing the similar trend.
Totally. It's fascinating to me how many stories have common elements like that.
That's great. Singer, massive influence on the entire movement, I think. Our audience is mostly rationalists, so I think most people already know what GiveDirectly is. But for any new listeners that are joining us, can you briefly say what is GiveDirectly?
I think the best way to think about GiveDirectly is it's a technology-enabled nonprofit that really emerged in the last 10 years, 15 years as a result of two big picture trends. The first big picture trend is massive adoption of mobile money, particularly in Africa. And so you have hundreds of millions of people becoming banked digitally for the first time ever. With that kind of becoming banked, it becomes easy to reach them, efficient to reach them in ways that had never been done before. So that's like the first big picture trend.
You mean them having access to infrastructure to open like bank accounts?
Not even bank accounts, it's mobile money. So that when they get access to dumb phones, those dumb phones have mobile money wallets associated with them. And so you essentially, all you need is a SIM card to be able to transfer and receive money most parts of Africa at this point.
Okay, great.
So the big telecommunication companies, like Safaricom is one as an example, essentially are operating as massive banks for the extreme poor and for the emerging middle class in these countries. It's adding liquidity into the system. It's making much more possible to reach those people much more efficiently and for them to save and so on.
That's really cool. And that certainly beats just walking around handing cash out, to the people that you can physically find.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. So that's the first big picture trend, and that really emerged in the last 15 years. The second thing that happened in that same period of time is that you have this increasingly robust body of evidence that for a long time, as people have tried to do good in the world, we kind of just did it based on gut feel. But what if we were to academically measure those things? And so we have the rise of randomized controlled trials and economics work to really put robust data behind what works, whether it's for global health or economic development or otherwise. The evidence really started coming through strongly that in the vast majority of circumstances, the most effective thing to do is not to run a training program to teach people to start a small business. It's just to give them a lump sum of money. And that will actually have bigger, better, more sustainable outcomes for the vast majority of kind of indicators that people are interested in. And it really, I think, is still in the process of revolutionizing the way that people understand aid and development, economic support, economic development, global health. It's really revolutionizing that because you've got this whole industry that is kind of predicated on the idea that we know best and that, some sort of centrally planned kind of set of interventions are going to be more effective than local knowledge or just an injection of capital. In the last 15 years, the evidence has not just emerged, but been increasingly compelling that direct cash transfers beat 9 out of 10 other interventions on most indicators that we're interested in. And so it's like the coming together of these two big picture trends is really what led to GiveDirectly, where we said we're going to be a technology first, technology enabled nonprofit that scales direct cash transfers to the world's extreme poor. And we do that in very simple ways. We raise money from people in America and from the global north. And then we have an extremely efficient way of identifying, targeting, and then sending cash, generally as one-time payment to people in extreme poverty. Then that acts as a kind of local economic stimulus, and they do the rest. So that's GiveDirectly. We've been around for around 15 years now and have transferred on the range of about $1 billion.
Wow. That's awesome. And I do want to circle back on the efficient way to identify which people to give money to. I think a lot of people's intuition, because, rationalists have high overlap with effective altruists, which are big fans of places like GiveWell, and GiveWell, I'm not sure if it's still their number one charity, but for years and years, it was the Against Malaria Foundation, which primarily handed out malaria or mosquito nets.
Yep.
Yeah. I certainly like that approach over the 1,000-mile away view of, well, this looks like a problem we can solve. Like, I think the play pump is my favorite example of a well-intentioned but deeply misguided and terribly.
So many of those.
Yeah. I mean, do we want to jump right into how you guys identify which people to give to, or the research about why giving people money directly is preferable to tested, like tried and tested and scientifically approved donations like GiveWell?
Why is that better than health initiatives or like a Deworm the World or Against Malaria?
Well, maybe I can step back and give you a little bit of context on just the kind of way the model works and some of the primary drivers of impact in that model, and then we can talk about how it compares across other types of programs. The core program that we run would be, we go to somewhere like Malawi, one of the poorest countries in the world. We identify communities where the vast majority of the people in those communities are in extreme poverty. So 85% or more of a village or of a district would be in extreme poverty, below $2 a day assumption. Once we identify them, then we would essentially enroll every single person in that community. When we enroll every single person in that community, we'll do a bit of community outreach, but then we'll just kind of enroll them. We'll compare it to government records and telco records, just verify everyone is who they say they are. And then they'll receive transfers in 2 payments. The first payment will be about $50 or an equivalent. That's essentially to test that the system's working. It's also, a lot of these folks are very food insecure. They don't get enough to eat. Most of our research says people make good decisions when they have a full belly. And so if we kind of do an initial small payment, then it allows them to secure themselves at a really kind of basic level. and then knowing that a larger payment, generally of about $500, is coming in a couple of months' time. And so then they can be really thoughtful about, okay, what are the investments they're going to make with that second payment, knowing that they're kind of coming from a place of stability. That's the delivery model. There's some additional complexity. We do audits to make sure that the money's going where it should be and there's no one who's diverting it in any way. Have a range of other safeguards in place, but that's the core model. The things that drive the impact, because you essentially get this initial injection of cash, and so people immediately get enough to eat, but it generally has this multiplier effect. Every dollar that goes into the community, generally you'll see about $2.50 circulate as people just spend more in their community. And so it's not just about what's the money that the individual receives. It's also about what's the multiplier effect of essentially this giant cash stimulus on the local economy that then recirculates in a kind of powerful and sustained way. Think of it almost like the 2008 economic stimulus in the kind of American economy. When we go into a region, we're kind of doing something that's 2 to 3 times larger than that level of stimulus that happened in the US. And the wild thing is that you actually see no inflation during that entire period, which is a thing that people are commonly kind of worried about.
Huh.
I can talk more about that in a moment. Maybe we can pin that. Yeah, that's the model. And then people typically spend their transfers on a bunch of different things. They get some basic food security, but then they make a lot of investments in what we would say is kind of productive assets and living conditions. They'll make sure they have somewhere stable to sleep. They'll maybe put tin iron sheets on their roof so it's no longer thatch. That means that they can collect rainwater. It also means that mosquitoes aren't breeding in the thatch. So that has a bunch of downstream consequences. And then they make a bunch of investments, sometimes in livestock, sometimes in small businesses, those investments that then essentially become sustaining. And what the academic research says is that 5, 7, 10 years later, you have this like sustained jump in economic activity, both at the individual and at the community level that just keeps going. And so that is like obviously very powerful from an impact perspective. So that's the core model.
That's really cool. You mentioned, for example, an initial influx of $50 and then $500. I know this will vary from country to country, but what does that roughly translate to for local spending power?
Think of it like 1 to 2 years worth of income all in one go. It's a huge injection. A US dollar goes a long way. We're like rural Māori, so getting that level of one-time injection then sets them up not just to look after their immediate basic needs, but to make some really sustained investments. And one of the really interesting studies that we've run, and something that's unique, I think, about GiveDirectly is we've been very research forward and very data driven in what we've chosen to do over time. We've done some really long-term trials on UBI, Universal Basic Income. We're running the longest trial on UBI in the world, actually. It's a 12-year-long study. We're halfway through. There were 3 arms to this trial, so 3 variants. One variant was payment that was monthly over the course of 12 years. Another variant was a payment that was monthly over the course of 3 years. And then the third variant was take the same amount of money as the monthly payment over 3 years and just give it to people all at once and compare what happens. And so we're still halfway through the 12-year-long study, so we don't have the results on the first variant. But the comparison between the second 2 is really interesting because it basically pretty unequivocally says the people who got the one-time large lump sum of money radically outperformed the people who got the same amount of money but broken into small amounts monthly over the course of 3 years. And the reason for that is, or at least the hypothesis for the reason, is that people were able to make more investments. Like if you're going to buy a motorbike to start taxi business, or if you're going to buy some land to become a small landowning farmer, that requires an injection of capital that then pays off over a longer period of time. Whereas if you're taking a kind of smaller monthly payment over a long period of time, it's more likely that ends up getting eaten up by just day-to-day consumption, like supporting your food and things like that. So that's just one example of some of the research that we've kind of done, and I think illustrative of why these one-time large injections, even though it feels like a reasonably large amount for the people receiving it, allows them to make this catalytic jump out of poverty.
I am really happy to be hearing this because one of my misunderstandings was I thought it was more of a long-term slow drip of money closer to a UBI, and I was really worried that would just end up creating dependence rather than encouraging people to be agentic and start things on their own. This revelation that you often just do, or it sounds like the standard procedure, is just to give them one large sum at first and let them go do whatever they want, start up something new with it, is really encouraging to me. I'm really glad to hear that. And it sounds like it actually works better in practice too. So I'm doubly glad to hear that my prejudices have been borne out.
I mean, I wouldn't say, I don't know that the UBI creates dependence, because like you still see really good improvements in people's like entrepreneurial activity and in their ability to earn income even after the UBI actually winds down. But in comparison to the one-time larger cash transfer, it does perform much. You know, we started out somewhat agnostic as to which of these we thought was going to be most impactful, and we ran the trials and got the data, and the data says it's one-time large lump sums, and so we're doubling down on that.
Just the impact that it's, $500 can equate to 2 years' income. I think everyone who's read anything on EA literature knows that the US dollar goes further than we imagined, but that's further than even I imagined.
It's wild. These are some of the kind of poorest communities in the world, and people in general will be getting 1 or 2 meals a day. Child mortality is really high. The kind of general conditions are tough. The really interesting thing is that, and this is why you don't see inflation when you do this, is that there's a lot of slack in the local economy. And slack is this idea that you have productive people or assets that are essentially underutilized. And so if you're a mechanic, there's just not much economic activity in the area. Maybe you get 1 or 2 jobs a week to repair a motorbike or to kind of work on a piece of machinery. And then the rest of the time, you're just doing nothing. When this injection of capital hits the local system, all that slack can get taken up by people and by businesses that are otherwise underutilized, which is what allows this kickstarting effect without inflation. People can absorb the increases in demand without it kind of leading to having to, open up new businesses or kind of acquire more suppliers or something like that.
I heard recently that you used to, or maybe you tried for a while, giving money to more like individualized people within an area, and have switched instead to like just giving money to everybody in an area instead. Is that the case? Did I mishear? And what are the advantages of that, if so?
Yeah, so there are still some circumstances where we will do individual targeting, but the bread and butter, the main thing that we will do is called saturation model, where we hit everyone in an area. And the reason for that is twofold. The first is it costs money and is pretty inefficient to try and identify exactly who should and shouldn't get money within a particular area. You might end up drawing some arbitrary line where you say, if you're earning less than $2.50 a day, then you'll get cash from us. And if you're earning more than $2.50 a day, then you won't get cash from us. First of all, you'll have some errors in your ability to target. Second of all, does it really make that much of a difference whether or not you're earning $2.40 or $2.70? And thirdly, because so much of the impact comes from this effect on the local economy, which is generalized rather than specific to an individual, it actually benefits everyone in the area for everyone to receive money, because it means that more money is circulating in the ecosystem. So we have moved to this saturation model, and we see some really powerful effects from that. And that's what's led to this kind of evidence that says for every dollar that goes in, $2.50 in kind of consumption or circulation in the local economy is what happens. And that's actually where the vast majority of the benefit to recipients actually comes from. It's the recirculation, not the initial receivement of the money.
So like the metrics that really matter is the economic stimulus that these direct cash transfers stimulate. Is that it?
That's the thing that drives impact. Then the question is, well, what are the flow-on effects? And this comes to your question about, okay, how does this compare to other interventions? When deciding what you want to make an impact on, you need to make some values choices about what are the outcomes that you care about. Do you value economic growth more than health increases? That is a moral choice. That's actually not something that I think there's an easily rational framework for. I think you can create them, but at the end of the day, you just need to decide, how do you compare saving the life of an under 5-year-old to increasing the quality of life for a bunch of adults? Because that's the choice that's being made. So most programs are actually pretty narrow in nature. They have to make a decision and say, what we want to do is we want to increase a certain outcome. That outcome might be entrepreneurial economic activity. You can think of this as like a job training program and this is very much in the traditional mode of aid and development, where you say, we're going to come in and we're going to take a bunch of people who either are or could be entrepreneurs, and we're going to run some training on them, with that training, they're going to start more effective small businesses. And with those more effective small businesses, they're going to have more food, they're going to increase their savings and all of their well-being as a result, and the flow-on effects from that. Like they're going to have better nutrition, they're going to generally have better lives. With cash, what we're able to do is we're able to say, okay, how much would it cost you to deliver that training? And what are the results that you would get as a result of delivering that training? And let's take that and let's compare in a rigorous way those results to what if we just gave everyone that same amount of money in unconditional cash? What would happen? And the vast majority of the time, just giving the cash outperforms on most indicators. And so I'm actually talking about a recent study where researchers found the value of a business training when given as cash outperformed on all of the indicators, whether it's having more productive assets at the end of 18 months, increasing productive hours, doubling of savings, basically taking the amount of money that you would otherwise have spent running the training and just giving it to people and seeing what they did with it, outperformed on all metrics. And across many programs that are traditional in the aid and development space, you see the same thing. Unconditional cash outperforms nutrition programs on nutrition because it turns out teaching a bunch of poor communities that it's a good thing to like have more milk in order to have more calcium, in order to have stronger bones and better teeth. Like they're like, sure, not super complicated. What we actually need is money to buy milk and assets to like generate money in order to keep buying milk. You're kind of solving the wrong problem here. Not in all circumstances, but in a large proportion. When you benchmark giving unconditional cash against many other types of programs, you see the unconditional cash outperforms. But then the question is, there are definitely some interventions out there that on a certain set of indicators will outperform cash. Bed nets and the Against Malaria Foundation, which I'm a huge supporter of and have given money to myself and think does great work. Giving money to anti-malarial bed nets is absolutely the kind of most efficient way to make a difference if what you want to do is work backwards from how do I most efficiently basically save children's lives. Working backwards from a kind of set of values choices that are about saying what I want to do is maximize for health outcomes, and the health outcomes that I care most about are saving lives, then Against Malaria Foundation is an amazing choice. Or I would basically defer to whatever GiveDirectly says, but they generally say that Against Malaria does a really great job there. But then the kind of question that you've got to ask yourself is also like, who gets to make that choice about how to value different moral outcomes?
Yeah.
Who am I to basically choose how much to value kind of health or relieving of suffering or the improved well-being of people who are getting to the end of their life and who are kind of in a lot of suffering because they're in a system that doesn't support them? Those are not choices that I think we can make with a kind of rational model, or at least we can, but like at the end of the day, you're making value judgment about what outcomes matter most. And so what my argument and the reason that I am doing the work that I am at GiveDirectly is at least some portion, and I think a significant portion of any giving should include as a value the agency of the people who are being affected. And that cash is like unequivocally the best way to do that because it puts them in the driver's seat. And so the combination of having them have the agency to decide actually what matters to them on the hard choices between kind of balancing health outcomes and investments in education and investments in their own experience of life or reducing their suffering, like how do you weigh which of those outcomes is most important? I want a significant portion of my giving to enable them to make that choice rather than for me to make that choice for them. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't make that choice at all. I will be someone who can use to support the most efficient, most effective global health charities as well. That's very important, and I care about that deeply at my own values level as well. But the reason that I'm at GiveDirectly is I think not enough of these choices are made by the people who are most affected by them. And when you combine that with the evidence of the effectiveness of it, it makes for a pretty compelling case, I think.
This has been an issue that I have really been struggling with the past couple of years myself. My friends, we put a strong value on individual liberty and respecting people's agency and not being paternalistic. And I think for that reason, we really liked or still do like GiveDirectly because it says like you over there in a completely different continent, you have the best grasp of what you actually need to succeed. I don't have much business coming in here and telling you what's best for you. Here's some money. Go do what you need to do to make your life better. I really like that. I love how much faith it has in humans and how it just enables people to be in control of their own lives and create, like I said, entire running economies. But over the last few years, I have realized how much of a bubble I live in, a very high agency. I live in a bubble of exceptional people, and I have come to realize that some people really do need some basic guidelines to protect themselves from themselves. Things like a church saying, don't gamble, because gambling, God hates you if you gamble. And that's just wrong since there is no God, but also it ends up placing some basic limits on actions that help people that would otherwise make self-destructive decisions without realizing that they were that bad. I've sort of started to realize that maybe half the population, maybe more, really does need some level of paternalism because they just don't have the capability to help themselves. And I don't know where I come down on that yet. It really goes against my values to go and say other people need to have decisions made for them. But then I see sometimes what happens with people who just don't have the basic agency they need to run their lives in a modern, complex world. Like maybe 200-300 years ago, they would have been fine. But now with how deeply complex and hard to understand a lot of the modern world is, they just can't flourish. And I don't know. I think maybe we don't need to choose that much between them. Like we can give some money to GiveDirectly and some money to something that takes the decisions out of people's hands and says, you're just going to get deworming and vitamin A and malaria nets because that's what we've decided is best. But honestly, I don't know how to make this sort of decision in an objective way. It feels like kind of crossing my fingers and hoping at this point.
I think what you're getting at is, at the end of the day, there are values choices here that need to be made at an individual level.
Well, not just values choices, but recognizing that there are people of different capabilities, and we do have some duty to care for the people who don't have the capabilities that we have.
I would argue that is disproportionately true where, I guess, causes of disadvantage and suffering are complex and intractable, or not intractable, but hard. And that is often actually more in more economically developed societies. When you look at the data for what happens in places like Malawi or Mozambique or these extremely poor communities that are really just struggling to survive, the evidence is that temptation spending, which would include gambling, which would include alcohol, which would include drugs, not just doesn't go up after an injection of capital. It actually sometimes often goes down. That is because the kind of causes of some of those things are about a lack of opportunity. The system that they're operating in has it's a relatively simple system because it's just there's not enough economic activity, and having some economic activity gives people productive things to do. For those communities, I actually think the evidence is very clear. And the evidence is that temptation spending doesn't increase. Often it goes down when you do that injection of capital. Now, I would also agree that there are communities and there are circumstances where putting that injection of capital isn't necessarily going to be the step change or the kind of breakthrough, but it might be for all sorts of different reasons, because of sustained disadvantage or a lack of opportunity or otherwise. But for the vast majority of communities that we work in, that's not the case.
I think that's somewhat aligns with my intuition. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I'm confident in guessing that the super majority of people who buy lottery tickets are not financially well off, that they're gambling on this because they want to turn their life around, not because their life's already going great and they want to enhance it. There's probably similar numbers with the amount of one's income that people spend on alcohol or something too. You mentioned about intractable problems. Are there examples that you have of the hardest barriers to get to people or to have that money work out well when handed to them? Whether it's a terrible government or I can imagine, if I live next door to the guy who makes $2.40 a day or $2.40 a day and I make $2.70, and my neighbor gets a cash influx of 2 years income and I don't, I could probably be a bit salty about that. Do you guys have any close-up research on how that works in local communities?
The research that we did that basically helped us identify the spillovers that I mentioned, the fact that when someone receives money, the value that they receive is not the main driver of impact. It's actually the spending and the circulation. The research that did that actually had randomization on who received it or which villages received it. So that did mean that there were some people who got it and some people that didn't. We were expecting some, or at least modeled in some negative spillovers that would come from essentially feeling salty about not getting it. But the kind of results, and I'm not speaking to kind of subjective well-being here. I'm sure that there were people who didn't feel great about not being chosen. Like, that is a thing that happens. But the benefit of all the spending that happens and the fact that people experience the benefit of that even in, communities 10, 15 kilometers away, just because of all the increased economic activity, significantly outweighs those negative spillovers. That's like one update that we had, because I do think that it's kind of reasonable to assume that there might be some negative spillovers, but overall they seem outweighed by the positive. But your broader question, I think, is about what are the conditions that need to exist for this to be a beneficial intervention. I would be the first to say that cash is not going to solve everything. Health infrastructure is not something that people are going to be able to build or invest in from individual choices and $500 transfers. Health infrastructure at a community or state level is incredibly important for beneficial outcomes. And that's only going to be something that happens through some degree of central planning, whether that's from a government or from NGOs or otherwise. And so that needs to exist in order for good health outcomes to happen. Cash can sometimes be very complementary to that. Actually, there's another really interesting piece of data from a piece of research a couple of years ago where we went in and did a bunch of cash transfers into a community, and then 7 or 9 years later went back and researched what had been some of the health impacts. And one of the wild results was that for the couple of years after those cash transfers went in, infant and child mortality was between 49 and 57% lower than in comparable communities. Wow. It's wow, you never see impacts of that size in kind of health outcomes. It's just a wild result. And so then the question is, well, how did that happen? It's one thing to receive $500. How does that translate into a halving of infant or child mortality for a couple of years?
Yeah, because it's one thing to have money to now spend on medicine, but if there's no doctors to give that money to.
Exactly. And so when you dig into the data, the mechanism is essentially mothers were accessing healthcare services earlier and more frequently when they received cash transfers and not when they didn't. And so the mechanism for this radical reduction in infant and child mortality was actually being proximate to some degree of healthcare services. And when those healthcare services existed or were sufficiently proximate, you saw these giant decreases. But when they weren't sufficiently proximate, when those healthcare services didn't exist, then the impact size significantly disappeared. It kind of speaks to this point that you're making, I think, or the question that you're asking, which is cash shouldn't exist in a bubble. Cash is not going to solve all problems in all communities. There are going to need to be some degree of complementary interventions, many of which are going to need to be centrally planned. But when you do those things, often cash can be an incredible amplifier as well.
That's awesome. That number is mind-blowing.
Actually, I have a question about government dysfunction.
Yeah.
One of the things that worries, I love economic growth in large part because it helps people to choose better health outcomes for their children, send them to school if they think that's what's best for them, whatever the case is. But also I worry a lot. It seems a lot of places, if a local economy gets going and starts churning, the government will come through, government corruption will eat it up, possibly warlords will come through and just take all the excess. What can be done in the face of just people coming in and taking these things because the systems, the local nation systems are so dysfunctional that you can't count on that stability to actually hold on to what you've created?
Yeah, great question. I think what this gets to, right, is that the single biggest driver of reductions in suffering and poverty that we've seen has been kind of macroeconomic growth. And the biggest stories we have for macroeconomic growth in the last 20, 30 years have been China and India. That is not as a result of aid, but often it's as a result of some degree of governance, some degree of fortunate trade and local economic resources and all the things. I'd be the first to say macroeconomic factors are by far and away very important. And if we had magic bullets that could drive macroeconomic growth at a country level, kind of regardless of existing government capability, we should do that. So that's the first thing. I think the second is, though, within a broader kind of macroeconomic environment, like there's still a lot of degrees of change that can happen at a local community level that are broadly very beneficial. And I think that that's what we see in places like Malawi, where they've faced a really kind of tough macroeconomic climate over the last few decades, where you essentially have a combination of climate shocks. This is a country that is increasingly affected by climate shocks, both drought as well as cyclones. You have a collapse of or a reduction in a main kind of source of industry, which is their biggest crop is tobacco. And so you've seen declining tobacco prices due to kind of global changes in demand and competition. But within that bigger macroeconomic story, like you can still run these trials and see how you can really see step changes in people's experience of need despite those changes in the kind of macroeconomic story. Now, Malawi is a country that it's the poorest stable country in the world. It has not been affected by conflict in the last few decades, and that is to the benefit of everyone there. And then the question is, though, when you have these unstable, possibly corrupt, conflict-ridden environments, what do you do? Unfortunately, if we kind of look ahead to 2030, the vast majority of the world's extreme poor are going to be living in places like the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, countries where you have a combination of high rates of extreme poverty, kind of low resilience and high impacts of climate shocks, and unstable governance and conflict-ridden regions. That combination is like a disaster, right? Like that is an extremely hard operating environment. What to do in those situations is like, it's a hard problem. But in 5 years' time, that's where the vast majority of the world's extreme poor are going to be living. And so the important thing, I think, for a community of people who are kind of trying to dedicated to doing good is to really grapple with that. And so for us, what that means is in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, that like literally right now is a conflict zone, coming up with ways of reaching people that are not dependent on government infrastructure, that are resilient to conflict and also resilient to systems that get knocked out when climate shocks hit, and that still work in these environments that, incredibly unstable. It is not as efficient as like operating in like peaceful rural Malawi. I will say that. And so if what you want to do is maximize for bang for buck now, then I would say like donate to our Malawi programs or to an Against Malaria Foundation or something like that. But if what you want to do is find solutions to the kind of intractable problems or the problems that are going to be really front and center in 5 years' time, then we've actually got to be grappling now with how to reach and support people in places like the DRC. And so that's something that we're doing. I think we do great work there. I think it is very evidence-based, but it does look different from that work in places like Malawi.
So rather than just staying out of conflict zones entirely until someone, I don't know, maybe a military can come in there and straighten things up, you actually think there's interventions you can do that will not be eaten up in the long term by whoever's running the conflicts?
Definitely. If we take DRC as an example, the conflict there has been going for 30 years. The prospect of that changing is, if we're to kind of take our role of, hey, we should be looking to reduce suffering wherever it exists and do so in as an effective and cost-efficient way as possible, then I think you can't ignore regions like that, regardless of the existing government infrastructure or kind of conflict environment. And what we see is like, we have evidence-based ways of working in places like that. So I'll give you an example. In the last couple of weeks, there's been a simmering conflict in the eastern DRC has kind of really broken out in a bigger way. There's a kind of rebel group called M23, which has seized control of large portions of the eastern DRC, including Goma, which is the capital city of eastern DRC and is where we have office. We have this program which we integrate with local cell phone kind of providers, and we use mobile towers to identify when there are displacement events. And displacement events are essentially when conflict causes people to flee their home. And so we are able to identify, without having any boots on the ground, when people have to flee as a result of conflict. We can target them using these technology and partnerships with telcos to basically say, we can see that this has happened, that you're kind of on the run and we're here to help. And so we can entirely remotely reach out to them We can enroll them, we can verify them and say like, okay, we know who these people are. We know that they're eligible. We can see what the situation is and we can kind of get cash to them. Not necessarily, like this might be a way of supporting them that isn't necessarily about catalyzing them out of poverty in a sustained way, but it may be about helping smooth through a shock in which people otherwise would have died or suffered significantly. And this is where that kind of moral value choice comes back to, like, how do you value helping people through a shock that causes incredible suffering and making that suffering less, or kind of making sure that people don't experience extraordinary need or kind of die during that moment, compared to, say, like a kind of intervention that might be like longer term economic development. Because if you're helping people through a shock and kind of reducing their suffering during that period, I would say that's like a really, really like important and valuable thing to do. That has to be part of the mix of making a better world and helping people. But that type of program will look different to one that is essentially about long-term economic growth. And I would say both are important.
I think this kind of ties into when we initially heard from you guys. You mentioned that you guys are using AI to help identify and verify recipients.
Yep.
I'm curious, I guess, what role technology plays versus human judgment, and more detail about what kind of AI and how that's playing a role.
GiveDirectly has always been very technology forward in the way that we operate. And so I think in the same way that we have tried to use, growth in fintech and mobile money and kind of expansion of cell networks in Africa to reach more people, we're kind of seeing AI as another tool to do that with. You've obviously got a few different types of AI. AI is a very big catch-all. I would say we're most advanced on using machine learning in a bunch of different ways. We're kind of more exploratory and kind of working on different ways that we might use generative AI, but I can talk about both. So on the machine learning front, we use machine learning primarily, but not exclusively, in disaster or crisis context to very rapidly identify the kind of communities that are most in need of support. Two examples of this. In Nigeria and in Mozambique over the last few years, we used a kind of machine learning driven flood forecasting model to identify villages that were about to be hit by floods. They hadn't actually been hit by floods yet, but we kind of take weather modeling combined with, we basically kind of partner with Google on this actually and use some of their tools to identify communities that are likely about to be near flooding. When we identify those keys, then we will essentially go in advance of that flooding and kind of send cash. The hypothesis being that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If someone can receive some money before a flood hit, then maybe they can relocate their livestock, maybe they can make their homes more resilient. And it's actually going to be a far more effective use of money than if we come in a few days after the flood and they're just cleaning up. That's kind of one example of how we're using machine learning to identify how to make the dollar stretch further. There's other examples in crisis response where, particularly in fires and cyclones, we'll use geospatial data and machine learning modeling kind of on top of that and satellite images to essentially identify which communities have been hardest impacted, overlay that with poverty data, and use that to kind of make sure that everything is being targeted to the right place. So that's kind of an example on the machine learning side. Every time we do something like that, we will start by doing this as a kind of benchmark. We'll benchmark our kind of traditional ways of targeting and reaching people and compare that to our ability to do so with machine learning. And only if it's exceeding both our quality and efficiency benchmarks would we actually switch to something that's kind of more kind of machine learning or AI driven. We have the kind of principle of wanting to be really recipient first. We want to be really oriented around how the people who are receiving money from us experience and receive us. And so it's important to us that when we use things like AI in our decision making, to actually kind of talk to the people receiving money about how they feel about that and kind of understand what's important to them in that process. So we ran a series of focus groups and research studies early last year to talk to people about what they cared about in these contexts and how they felt about those types of decisions. And this was in the context of us using telco data to identify poverty levels in a certain community in order to make sure that we were getting money to the people who needed it most. And we were using a partnership with the telco to get cell phone usage data and then use that to do targeting. And so as you can imagine, when you talk to people in rural Malawi, we've got to figure out how to communicate something like machine learning. And then once we figure out how to communicate it and make it explainable, have a real conversation with them about what is it that they care about in this context. The types of things that we learned in that process. First of all, people cared most about speed. They said, in these types of environments, if it helps you move faster, then we're all for it. The second thing we heard is they also care about inclusion. And so if data quality would lead to people being excluded or left behind, then they had significant concerns about that. And then the third is from a privacy perspective. They actually trusted us quite highly once we kind of were able to communicate. Here's how we think about privacy. Here's the encryption that we do. Here's the protocols that we have in place. And so they had no problem with us kind of being able to leverage data in that way, but they wanted to be confident that wasn't something that was going to be exposed to or understood by neighbors and family and so on. So that kind of informs how we can those types of environments. I can talk about generative AI as well, but that's on the meeting side.
What's the quick version of how you guys are using generative AI? Because that is actually, I'm really curious how that would play a role.
Yeah, so definitely less mature than our machine learning stuff. The opportunity with generative AI that we see is kind of twofold. One is customer support, which just, is very intuitive, but we maintain call centers in order to be available to our recipients at all time and troubleshoot for them and so on and so forth. And so there's obviously a set of applications that are very standard customer support things that are about scaling support to people in languages that they can understand at all times of the day with high quality that are unlocked by generative AI. So that's one. But I think second, there's a set of evidence around different types of training, learning, and education programs, structured pedagogy that has pretty good evidence for increasing people's both education as well as livelihoods outcomes. The problem with these programs is that they're quite hard to scale in a high quality way. The evidence for them in a contained environment is quite good in terms of like coaching people through certain types of investment decisions or how to kind of run their business or things like that. But typically these programs both cost a lot of money to deliver, but then quality control is really hard as you scale it up. And so I think there's like quite a lot of promise around two things. One is this kind of structured pedagogy around different types of business and health outcomes where having cheap, free, high quality access to coaching advice and support via a free hotline or something like that has a lot of potential. And so that's something that we're actually running some pilots on this year. The second is actually access to market information and prices. So one of the big challenges if you're in a remote community in Malawi is like having access to market data about what, the price of different goods are or how different crops are kind of selling on the market or things like that or what the opportunities are. And so we're actually also going to be trialing a kind of hotline that allows people to get access to market information to allow them to make more informed choices about how they spend their money. And that is really unlocked by having a quality of voice generative AI system that would be very hard and expensive for us to scale otherwise.
If I got it correctly, a lot of it is about having these sorts of AIs acting as personal assistants to help people out in the ways that a lot of people use them nowadays in the first world, but that haven't percolated into the poorer countries yet, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That sounds really brilliant, actually. And I think kind of helps with my concern earlier that a lot of people don't have enough agency and ability to navigate the modern world to make use of money well. Very well might if they have a personal little AI in their pocket helping them out that they can ask questions.
Totally. Yeah. Access to high quality information and really accessible kind of high quality advice. Like often when you look at the way these studies and trials are done across all these types of interventions, people find these really promising programs that get these really impressive results that then fail to replicate at scale. It's unclear exactly why that is true, but there's basically two main theses. One thesis is that it was unique to those very specific conditions. But the other thesis, which to me is like a little bit more believable, is that it's just extremely hard to do quality control once you're operating those things at sufficient scale, and quality really matters. And that is super unlocked by modern generative AI in a way that is really exciting, I think.
I really love this because a lot of people have been talking about like, oh, AI is only going to be useful to the top 10% of high functioning people with, programming jobs or whatever. But really, simply asking your pocket god questions on day-to-day life can make huge differences to your life. And this may be the thing that like helps raise the floor for billions of people far more than it helps eke out a little bit more advantage among the top, which makes me very optimistic, actually.
Totally. We just got to put the right amount of money into doing it well. Man, if the amount of capital that's being thrown at SaaS productivity, white collar workflows, there's like 5% of that to some of these applications that we're talking about, you would make me a very happy person.
Wow, man. Is there a dedicated program just for this anywhere?
There's a few people who are kind of playing and toying with it. We're investing our own money in it. Google and OpenAI and various people have their own like little accelerators that they're kind of making grants from. But I would say on the kind of scale of capital that's necessary to do this in the most exciting way, it's not $500,000 grants at a time, which is essentially what's coming from the industry right now. Instead, it's the kind of more sustained capital investments that will unlock it at greater scale.
This is blowing my mind with its potential already.
Yeah, I'm sharing your enthusiasm. The idea of, just being able to reach into your pocket and ask like, hey, I've got $180. Like, how do I spend this most effectively here in my circumstances? And getting a useful answer. I think it solves a lot of the reservations people might have about the money being used ineffectively or something.
Yeah. Or just like, I'm trying to start up a little local business to help my neighbors. Is there any things that I'm overlooking? What are the legal hurdles I have to jump? And it'll just tell you, oh, you got to file this and this paper, fill out these forms, pay your $5, and you're good to go. Like that. That's a huge unlock.
Totally. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
That's awesome.
Okay, I guess my earlier question from looping around, putting money into like conflict zones to me feels like just dumping resources into a fire. I realize it alleviates some local suffering, but the only thing I could really think of doing in a conflict zone is just focusing that money on getting people out and putting them places where they can live, happy, productive lives instead. Do you personally think like this is a good use of your money to give it to people in conflict zones that are trying to survive another few days? It feels more like this is a thing that feels good rather than this is a thing that is highly effective. And if you really do think it's a darn good use, like what convinced you of that?
I think this is really a kind of value this, because I think that if what you want to do is make sure that your dollar goes furthest for the most people in the most sustainable way, then I would say give to our program in Malawi, which is a stable, conflict-free context that's extremely poor. And this year, we're going to put in $70-80 million to that. We have the capacity to absorb $250 million in the next year on that. And so we're just like, how do we get this to scale? Like that is very much bread and butter, unequivocally good, not complicated. Let's do it. I think that there is a very compelling case for that. It depends what you value, because for me and for talking to certainly some of our donors, they will value the alleviation of suffering more highly than the kind of maximization of well-being. And I don't think that is an unreasonable or crazy moral prioritization to make. That alleviating a kind of an ounce of suffering, it might be worth a pound of, maximizing well-being. If I step back and, put myself behind Rawls's veil of ignorance and consider where might I get born if I was to be reborn in this world. The unluckiest people in the world get born in the DRC or the Central African Republic because of the combination of conflict, climate, and poverty that exists there. So should some part of a doing good portfolio speak to or try and address the kind of suffering or the kind of massive injustice that exists just purely as a result of where they're born? I would say yes. Is it an unreasonable choice for any one donor to say what I care about is, stretching the money furthest and kind of making that sustainable? No, I think that's a very reasonable choice, and like a very significant portion of my giving goes there. But I think like taking the big picture view of what are the problems that we need to solve and how do we go about solving them, I would say that a portion of it also goes to the alleviation of suffering in environments like that, and to the exploration of and commitment to finding solutions for what it will take to sustainably like help people out of those situations. And that's never going to happen if we're not working at it.
The mention of Rawls's veil of ignorance brings me to the next thing I was going to ask. I personally have philosophical objections to the veil of ignorance, which I don't think we have time to get into here. But it does lead me to ask, if at the end of the year, a typical American has, I don't know, $12,000 spare once all the expenses and everything with living is taken care of, they can spend all those $12,000 on making the lives of their own children better, giving them more opportunities, just giving them a better life. or they can like take 1,000 of that and give it to a effective charity to help someone on the opposite side of the world, which they'll never see. They aren't 100% sure the money's even going to be used that well. Why should someone hurt their own child a little bit to help people far away? Why do that? Because it is always a trade-off.
Why effective altruism?
Yeah.
But and I don't think it has to be effective altruism. I think for me, like, this choice is a fundamentally personal one. And so I think it's, I don't know. I'm not someone who thinks that there is a kind of morally righteous way of viewing the world. I think there are different value systems, and I know which ones resonate for me and what feels right to me. And I hope that more people kind of come to align with me over time. But I'm never going to judge people for having like slightly different value systems. But my answer is, at a pure bang for buck level, the marginal decrease in positive life outcomes for you or your child from taking some portion of your hard-earned money and putting it towards something that I actually think you can have very high confidence is going to make a very large difference for quite a large number. Just kind of looking at the ROI of that and the trade-offs involved, I think it's just extraordinarily high confidence, high bang for buck. And if what you care about is reducing suffering and increasing the level of happiness and health in the world, then a small amount of money goes an extraordinarily long way in a really quite high confidence manner. And so exactly what the right proportional threshold is will vary on an individual basis. Like, I'll say, like, for me and my partner, we've been doing 20% of our income for 15 years.
Wow.
And that feels right for me. Just, I feel so lucky to have been born in the place that I've born, to have had the opportunities that I've had. And so that feels like an easy choice. I know other people have chosen 10%. I know other people will choose, like, when they feel able to, they will make a gift. I'm not going to say that there is an absolutely right or wrong way of doing that. But I think on a pure bang for buck basis, if you kind of reflect on your values and say, I care about maximizing happiness or increasing the amount of flourishing in the world or reducing suffering, then there's really high confidence, high bang for buck ways of doing that really have very, very, very marginal cost on your personal life.
Every time I read Scott Alexander writing about this, I'm like, oh my God, you're so right. I should give much more to GiveDirectly or AMF or something. But let me put it another way. There are, in my local community, a number of people who need help for whatever reason. Sometimes they're doing good work, which is underfunded, which helps people in their area. Sometimes they're just literally people who are going through bad health events or need help in some other way. My local area is fairly functional, but it has some dysfunction. If I have, let's say I did take, out of the $12,000, I'm taking $1,000 to give to charity, to making the world better. Should I not prioritize making the world better around me first? The people that I know, the people that are helping my community to stay healthy and stay strong so we can keep doing things for each other in the future and maybe keep making the world better in other ways. Why so strongly prioritize people who may have very different values from me, people who may want to stone gay people, for example, or who may want to keep women subservient, when there's people who are values aligned with me right next door who do need some help. And sure, it costs 20 times as much to help them in the US than it would help them in a faraway country. But on the other hand, they're probably more than 20 times as aligned with me and what changes I want to see in the future for the human race. So maybe it's worth it.
Yeah, well, I'll try to resist being the let's only help people who are ideologically aligned with ourselves. Leads to a fairly dystopian vision of the world. But I think the first way that I would push back is, like, is it really an either or can it be a both and? There is just so, like, for anyone listening to this podcast, for any of us sitting here, I think we just live in such a time of abundance and fortune that I think the vast majority of the time, this doesn't need to be an either or. It's possible to be a both and. Both are possible with almost negligible impacts on. That is my kind of first and 90% of my answer. The other 10%, though, is, for me at a personal level, I value proximity somewhat, but it is not high on my kind of order of what matters to me most in the world. So obviously I'll be there to support friends and family, and if they need the help, I will do that. And obviously that will also be true somewhat in my community. But when I think about how I want to be weighting things kind of at a values level, like, do I want kind of the good or bad that's happening in the world to be determined by accidents of distance? Personally, no. And so that's the kind of choice, that's where I get to. I think that's only 10% of the answer, because I think the vast majority of the time it can be a both and, not an either or. But the kind of accident of proximity is a relatively poor way to make all of our moral choices based on.
Oh, there's a lot of people I'm in close proximity to who I have, who I am actually in opposition to, and would like to take resources away from them if I could. So it's less about physical proximity and more about the people who I think would reliably also care about me in the future, as opposed to want to oppose me and what I care about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think I navigate that answer similarly to you, Nick, that I mean, my automatic bank transfers go to effective charities, but I give locally every year as well. As recently as a couple weeks ago, a previous coworker was seriously injured. I gave money to his GoFundMe. I helped pay some of my grandmother's bills. Are those effective charity donations? No.
The thing that I would say here is, I think it's possible to kind of really tie yourself in knots trying to optimize every single choice and kind of find the exact right thing to do in any given circumstances. And I just think that's like the wrong way to live and make choices. I think the right way that I have done is like come up with a simple rubric that gets you 90% of the way there with 10% of the effort, and then just try and stick to that. And so for me, that's been out of the giving that me and my partner do, we kind of divide that into 40, 40, and 20. 40% goes to really high evidence, like what you would consider effective charities, optimizing for outcomes that I think are important. Over the years, this has been money that's gone to Against Malaria Foundation. It's gone to whatever GiveWell has recommended. It goes to GiveDirectly. Like, that's kind of one bucket, and that's 40%. There's another bucket, which is another 40%, which I consider moonshots, which is basically high risk, high return stuff. Because basically, I think there's not enough risk taking and ambition and willingness to fail and moonshots in things that could really radically lead to giant changes in the way that people experience health, happiness, security, and lack of suffering. And so I think I can have a disproportionate impact by putting more of my money into things that are kind of high risk, high return. And that's like earlier stage stuff. That's promising technology things. There's like all sorts of stuff. That's another 40%. And then the like final 10 or 20% is very reactive, like friends, community, what comes up on a daily basis or weekly basis that I just want to support because I care about those people or I care about whatever. And, that's my rubric, 40, 40, 20. Is that right? I don't know, but it works. It's close enough. It gets me 90% of the way there. And I think that's what I would advocate for, is to kind of come up with their own version of it.
Yeah, I think that I realized some years ago that trying to live the perfect utilitarian calculated lifestyle is not a way for a human to flourish. The automatic withdrawals from my account that go to effective charities do nothing for me, like psychologically. Once in a while, I'm reminded of it, like during conversations like this, but I don't really think about it, and I don't think it really makes me happy as much as, being able to give money to someone close to me's, GoFundMe or something does, right? And so I try to satisfy both ends of that, just, what I should do as an ideal person and what I should do as an actual person.
Yeah, totally.
Do you see a lot of variation between how different cultures and countries spend the money that they receive? Like, you guys have give money to U.S. people, U.S. citizens during times of crisis, right? Is that money spent differently? I mean, it's obviously spent differently, but what sort of cultural impact do you see played out there?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we really have two types of operations. Like, one is in places where there's extreme poverty or kind of disasters in extreme poor context, and then one is our US programming. Our US programming is quite different. That's something that we do, basically use it to recruit new donors that we try and then get overseas. Our mission is about extreme poverty. It's not about kind of maximizing change in the US, mostly because of the bang for buck point. But there's just an enormous amount of money and innovation that's possible when focused exclusively on the US context. So where there is money that we would not otherwise be able to access for other that we can kind of help people with and facilitate, then we will do so. And so you do see variations, I think, on what happens in the US compared to what happens in places like a Malawi or a Mozambique. In Malawi and Mozambique, it really is, you have these kind of extreme poor conditions where you have food insecurity, people are not getting enough to eat, there's malnutrition, the kind of basics aren't provided for. And so that's just where the money goes. In the US, whether it's a disaster environment or otherwise, often the causes of poverty or disadvantage are more complex. They're kind of operating within larger economic systems. It's also that the money goes less far. And so it's much harder for us. We don't give anyone in the US the equivalent of 1 to 2 years worth of income.
Right.
And so we try to get a lot more targeted in the US. So one program that we have in the US is every pregnant woman in Flint, Michigan, which is kind of historically being one of the lowest socioeconomic areas of the country. Every pregnant woman receives a $1,500 transfer from us around the time of the child's birth, and then $500 a month for the first year of the child's life. And this is a kind of targeted intervention that's funded in partnership with Michigan state government, as well as a bunch of kind of private philanthropists, as essentially a kind of targeted early childhood health, child development intervention. Because when you look at the data about, in particular, low socioeconomic parents, earnings plummet around birth, and then by the end of the year one, they kind of come back up. And then that has this disproportionate impact on kids in terms of their kind of brain development and their security and nutrition and so on. Targeting an intervention like that, we think can be quite high bang for buck. What people will choose to spend that money on is going to be quite different to what we would see in Namibia or Mozambique, obviously. Like that's going to support better food. It's going to support actually like more childcare, things like that, that are going to be hopefully very beneficial for the recipients during that period, but obviously going to be very different to other communities as well.
That makes sense. This is actually maybe a good way to wrap up. And then if there's time for bonus questions at the end, we'll get to those. But as much as I'd like to say that we have listenership that could give you a 10x boost tomorrow, I don't think that's quite the case. But if you guys did get 10x funding tomorrow morning, how would you deploy it? What constraints do you guys have beyond money to limit your growth and impact?
It's a great question. One of the reasons that I'm excited about cash transfers is I care about finding solutions to the world's problems that are really scalable. Compared to many people who would consider themselves effective altruists, where what they want to do is they want to maximize the kind of marginal dollar, I'm interested in finding solutions that can scale to billions of dollars and get more effective over billions of dollars rather than. And I think cash is one of the very, very few interventions that can credibly make the claim to be able to absorb in the billions and do so in a way that not just kind of maintains efficacy, but probably increases as well. And there are just very few interventions in the world that can do that. When I look at GiveDirectly, like at the moment, one of the things that we're working on is scaling to every adult in extreme poverty in Malawi, because we think that it's possible to actually plausibly catalyze an entire country out of extreme poverty at the same time. It's not certain by any means, like it is a moonshot by a long way, but we are basically working on setting the conditions, creating the operational capabilities, and then raising the capital to plausibly deploy billions of dollars into Malawi as a one-time demonstration of catalyzing an entire country out of poverty. We've been working on this for a few years. We started by basically saying we're going to do it in an entire sub-district in which 75,000 adults, every single adult in a sub-district. And we did that and we measured like a whole bunch of different things. This is where we did all of our analysis on inflation to kind of determine that we could do this safely and responsibly without causing inflation, and that worked. And so that was phase one. And then phase two, what we're in right now, is scaling up to an entire district or the equivalent of a state. And so that's going to be around, just under 350,000 adults. And that's going to cost $150 million over the next couple of years. And all of this is gearing towards being able to kind of credibly, confidently deploy in the billion. And so in the next couple of years, like we could absorb about $1.4 billion right now, just with our existing systems. That's about somewhere between 5 and 10x what we would otherwise just expect to do. But what we're trying to do is scale up such that we're able to do even more of that, because there is an increasing amount of concentrated wealth in the world that a small number of people who I think have generally good values and want to do good things with are able to deploy. And we're trying to create mechanisms for them to deploy that effectively.
That's awesome. That's a very compelling answer. And you make a good point that, if the Against Malaria Foundation got $30 billion, it's not clear how they would scale that or what they'd do with it. But the answer is very clear here. We'd give more money to more people.
Yep. The idea of an entire country uplift as a charity moonshot just sounds so fantastic. I legit think I would love to give some money to this just to see what happens.
Right? I mean, I think this is what I meant. Like, we need so much of trying to do good in the world is kind of characterized by these like incremental risk averse slow steps. And that is important in many cases. But I think in the same way that venture capital plays a role in startup innovation and technology innovation, I think we need more of that in the doing good world, where we take these moonshots that could really catalyze something totally different than what we've seen before.
That's awesome. Well, do you have a couple minutes for maybe a bonus question before we do the maybe 60-second wrap up?
Yeah, go for it.
You've been talking a lot about scaling. You started, though, saying that you were one of the first 10 employees at change.org, and you learned some very hard lessons about what it takes to do things in the real world at scale, which was tantalizing. What were these hard lessons you learned at change.org about scaling?
Oh, man, I could go on for hours about this. I would say we prematurely scaled.
For more on change.org and quite a bit more about its effects over the years, sign up for the subscriber-only content at Patreon or Substack.
And overall leads to healthier, stronger, better communities that, more responsive to what people want. And I think ultimately that's a really important thing.
Awesome. It goes back to kind of what we're talking about impact. More parks in the cities sounds great, but that sounds like a stretch goal when it comes to solving all the world's problems.
I mean, you got to take all these big problems, you got to break it down into bite-sized pieces. It's like I've been around too long to believe in silver bullets. Even with the idea of national scale for cash transfer, that's taking this extraordinarily intractable problem of just like global poverty as a whole. But let's take a slice and let's take an audacious swing at that slice. And I think that's true of like every issue that people kind of might be interested in. Is like, it seems so intractable when you're kind of looking at it at the big picture, and the more that you break it down into these bite-sized pieces, the more that things start to be movable.
Awesome. Well, I'm mindful of your time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Obviously, we'll put links to GiveDirectly in the show description. We can link to this tech innovation fact sheet that Nicole and Rahula sent over. Is there anything else you'd like to plug or have us link to or mention?
I mean, I would just say head to givedirectly.org. We would love and value any support that you can give. It is a incredibly important part of anyone's portfolio. I think for some people, it could be their whole portfolio. For others, it might just be a part of it. But you can have an extraordinary amount of good impact in a really high confidence way with a relatively small amount of money. And so we appreciate all the support we can get.
I completely second that. And what a great future it'll be when you guys get to point at Malawi and say, look, we did this, now on to the next one.
Exactly.
That's going to be awesome.
Hopefully in the next moonshot experiment, everyone in Malawi can also get a little AI in their pocket to help them through all the little problems in everyday life and allocating money and being efficient.
Totally.
Thank you so much for joining us. GiveDirectly.org is where we will send everybody.
Thank you both. Great to meet you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day. All right, Steven, welcome back. I wanted to comment on GiveDirectly a little bit. I had some more time to think about it. So we were just talking about charity and giving to people across the world and how it is absolutely and undeniably a good thing.
I feel like you're saying it's undeniably a good thing, but here's the reason why it's not. Is that why you're hemming and hawing?
Exactly, yes.
All right, what do you got?
So what I have is that our culture, which I think is the best culture and the culture that I want to live in, is also a dying culture. This is a culture that does not reproduce at a high enough rate to stay around in the long term. And this is unfortunate. And I don't know what one can possibly do to turn that around. But I've been reading and listening broadly to people with all sorts of opinions about why people just don't want to have kids as much anymore. One of the big ones that I think I agree with is that there isn't a sense of community. There isn't a strong sense of these are my people anymore. Everything is just kind of like, I just want to have the best life I personally can have, and maybe with like one or two of my friends or lovers, which does not inspire having children, at least not the 3+ children that are needed to keep a culture at replacement levels. And one of the things that forms a thick community or a strongly bonded community is people sacrificing for each other. And I think a lot of charity is making sacrifices for people.
That might almost actually be the definition.
Yeah, exactly. So people making sacrifices for people far off that they'll never see are spending a lot of their resources and not getting community out of it, which in turn leads to this ever more falling apart of community and ever less drive to have children. I guess what I'm saying is, I've been hearing some people talking about a sort of enlightened tribalism. This actually started coming up a long time ago for me in nerd circles. Like when people would go to science fiction conventions or to gaming conventions for the first time, they'd be like, oh my God, I have found my people. I have found my tribe. This feels so great. I get a feeling that people who do have a strong tribal identity tend to have more children. And part of having that sort of tribal feeling is giving up things for each other, sacrificing for each other. And so it's kind of my opinion that a lot more sacrifice should be done to people that you see every day and that are part of your tribe. And likewise, that they sacrifice for you in the same way. And that builds bonds. And that maybe makes people want to have children more. So, like when he was saying that out of their total charity budget, they give 80% to people they'll never see and 20% to local causes. I kind of think that should be inverted or more. Like if I'm giving away 10% of my income per year, I would expect to give 8 to 9% to my community, my tribe, my people, making visible sacrifices for them and getting sacrifices in return, and maybe 1 to 2% to people across the world where it does a lot of good. But I would like to have a strong enough sense of community and tribe that having children feels important because it keeps the tribe going.
There's at least two ways to respond to this. One, the first thing is the replacement rates via birth. Like, I'm assuming by tribe, you kind of mean like the rationalist community.
In my particular case, yes, but I think there's a whole lot of different tribes, communities, societies. Like, I was just on jury service recently, and it was neat running into like a whole bunch of people from a whole bunch of walks of life, and they have different lifestyles, they have different tribes, and that's great. I'm glad that we can all live next to each other. So I think all of them should give more to their local tribe as well.
In the context of rationalists, I was thinking that like the community as it is less than 20 years old
Mhm.
and has however many people it has.
Mhm.
It did not get this way through people, rearing children into the community.
Yeah.
It scaled horizontally rather than vertically.
Mhm.
And I think that can be the solution for how we keep getting more rationalists. And we don't need to do replacement rates over generations. We just need to make sure we sell rationality to more than one person per person in the community.
I disagree. I think if we're thinking long term, then we do definitely want to actually have this community to be around for our children and not just have to always count on recruiting more college kids that are autistic, nerdy people like us. Like, I mean, that's great. We should continue to reach out for them. We should always make sure that there's that community for the people like us who can discover us and feel at home and welcomed with us. But I think having our own children is also really important. Because otherwise, like we're a genetic shredder, right? We're like when we had the episode on the IQ shredder phenomenon of large metropolitan cities, where the smartest people in the country move to the cities and are very successful and have 0 to 1 children on average, and it just reduces the IQ of the nation by having all the smart people move to the cities and then not reproduce. I feel that would be a similar thing happening if we recruited a whole bunch of people and then they never had kids.
I think there's a couple disanalogies though. Is that in the IQ shredding problem, you actually are like at the cost of somebody being productive in one part of the world, you're drawing them into the city where they won't reproduce. In the rationalist sense, they don't have to leave the community they're in, and maybe they do. Maybe they have to go to San Francisco, but you can leave more than one rationalist behind you as you did it, right? Whereas the person, taking their big brain to go to the city can't. If the person with the big IQ going to the city to get a big job could just make 3 more smart people in their small town before they left, they would do that. But it's not so easy, right?
I don't think you can make rationalists. I think that the people with the neurotype to be rationalists are born, and then they may find rationalism, and like that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find them and be like, hey, you can be home with us. This is awesome. But I don't think you can cause someone to have that neuroarchitecture. And so if everyone with that
unless you give birth to them.
Exactly.
I see. I mean, I would even wonder if giving birth to them would give you a great odds of, and the thing is, we don't have the time, we don't have the longevity studies yet, or the longitudinal studies yet to figure out if this is true.
Right.
But a lot of people don't align ideologically with their parents.
Yeah.
And not just because their parents have dumb ideologies. That's true in many cases, but it could be that your parents have perfectly fine ideologies that you just didn't jive with. Like my parents weren't nerds.
Okay.
Like in really any sense in any senses of the way that I am.
So my parents certainly weren't either, especially considering that they grew up in Poland under Soviet rule in the 60s and 70s. But as the more I get to know my parents, the more I realize that I am very much like my dad in terms of like attitude and how we think, and not very similar to my mother. If he had been my age in the early aughts, he might have ended up in the rationalist sphere as well.
That's a question that is in theory testable, but hasn't been tested. I mean, we have some rationalist friends with kids. If we give it another 10 years, and we'll see how many of their kids are rationalists.
Yeah,
that might settle this actually empirically. But I do think that there's something to not disregard, just the effect of how strong spreading horizontally can be. Like, we can raise the sanity waterline even for non-rationalists just by existing and succeeding in the world, and people are wondering, how are those people crushing it at life? Oh, they need to, well, they enrolled at courses at Guild of the Rose. That's how they did it. And then, that'll percolate through society. And yeah, it won't attract everybody, but it'll keep us above replacement rates, I think. And maybe not. So I don't want to disregard that your concern entirely. I do wonder, when you're saying like long term, are you meaning like, 500 years?
I'm meaning like 40 to 80 years.
Because I think we can still keep attracting enough people to our cause where we'll still keep growing in 40 to 80 years. Like, because at some point, maybe only 10% of the world is the right kind of nerd to want to be like this. And it might take 40 or 80 years to find all of them. And at that point, we'll only have 1 billion people that are rationalists.
But then do we want to drive those 1 billion people to extinction over the next few generations?
No, but I bet those billion people could think of something.
I mean, my answer is curing aging, which I think is the best answer we can hope for.
Right.
But
this whole conversation kind of prefaces like things staying roughly the same for the next centuries.
Yes.
Or at least the next several decades. And I'm rolling with that. So, yeah, no, I mean, you're right. At some point they'll have to start reproducing. Probably. Because you're right. I can imagine that, in 80 years, the billion rationalists that exist are having kids at the rate that they're having them now. We will not survive the subsequent 80 years, assuming everything else stays constant. And so you're right. I can run with that to chase your concern to the second point I was going to make. But my second point will be a longer one. So what were you going to say?
The reason I would want these thicker communities with people who sacrifice for each other is pretty selfish too. I'm putting it in altruistic terms, and that our community is going to die out, and our grandchildren won't have this community to put their children into anymore. But to be more selfish about it, I just like this community, and I think that having stronger bonds between people is just straightforwardly good and makes the community better. And I think that people sacrificing for each other is what you do to get that. There's places where you don't see each other very often and you don't do that much for each other, and like you feel some sense of community, but it's not super deep. It's like the sense of community you might have with the people that you go to watch the football game with every week, as opposed to a deeper community like a church community where, like in the olden days, where like we went through this famine together and we survived this flood together. And remember that plague? Man, that was bad, but we all pulled together to get through that. We don't have that because we don't have such bad problems nowadays, but we did have people sacrificing for each other constantly. And I think having that sort of sacrificing for each other builds thicker community bonds and makes everyone within them less lonely and thus less miserable and less thinking things like, what am I doing on this earth? Why am I here? Why should I even bother with anything? Which I know a lot of people do struggle with. Even people who are like in the rationalist community and feel like they live pretty good lives, where they have all the riches of the Western modern world, they have health, and yet they're like, why am I even here? That doesn't solve the depression and the existential angst and the generalized anxiety from not having a community that you feel you are part of and you can trust and rely on. And I think if people were to do a lot more for each other, then they would have that. That's what I'm advocating for when I say maybe give a lot more charity to your local area, your local group, your community, and less to far-flung places. Because even though you do save more lives, you yourself are burning out due to emotional strain of not having a community, and these things will not continue. Like there may not be people that are doing this in a few generations just because they all burnt out giving all their money to the foreign areas. And I would much rather see these things continue if that's what it takes for them to continue.
Right. No, I think I'm following you. And this brings me to the second point. I think this is basically what Nick said, is that it's up to you, man. I don't give 10%. I give closer to 3%. And when things settle down a bit more, I want to give more money. And actually, I can't remember he said he gave some substantial fraction of his income. I forget what it was though.
20.
20, right.
Mhm.
And then of his 20% of his income that he gives, he broke it down 40, 40, and 20. And that's dope. But I think it's up to everyone to make the decision on where they want to spend that money. Well, I was going to say I don't think it's possible for someone else to assess like that you're doing it wrong, quote unquote. But I do think that there are causes that are absolutely like totally not worth the money.
Mhm.
I haven't mentioned this in at least a few months, but I was watching Celebrity Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and Anderson Cooper had the charity of bulletproof vests for police dogs.
Right.
And I bet I like dogs. I mean, I maybe not more than him, probably not actually, because that's his charity. But I probably like dogs more than you, not just you and Yash, but the listener. I am crazy about dogs. I love them a lot. But that is the dumbest fucking charity I've ever heard of. I guess what I'm saying is there is a way to grade people on giving to charity poorly. They don't help people near or far. Your argument for helping people near, I think it's just a values preference.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you that your values there are like wrong or poorly calibrated. For me, it is really the other. I haven't mathed it out because I haven't been doing it that rigorously as Nick has to see where I give all my charity money. But it's definitely closer to his fraction of like I give most of it to the things that I'll never see that don't do anything for me psychologically, and then I give some fraction of it to the people that are near me and that I get to be happy that I helped.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of kind of personal preference. Like I don't think I could sell you on it if you're not already inclined to buy it. You know what I mean?
Well, that's basically what I'm doing right now. Is I'm trying to say that the option of giving to near people that are part of your community is actually just as important as giving to the most effective charities. Honestly, in my opinion, might be more important. So when the effective altruist people say that only the most effective charities really count and the rest are things that you can do to feel good but shouldn't count as part of your effective budget, in my opinion, that's just plain wrong. And giving to your local community in order to strengthen the bonds of your community is just as important as malaria nets or giving directly, and you should count it just as much. And personally, I would push for, instead of the 40-40-20 split he was talking about where 20 was his local, I would go like 10-10-80, with 80 being the local. Unless you've just got a whole lot of money and you can afford to spend much more to faraway places, I do think that people should be willing to invest quite a fair bit in their local community where they can feel like they are contributing to people who know them and building something that is sustainable in the long term in places where they will be remembered.
And I don't think I can actually really challenge that. Not, and maybe I could if I was a better arguer, but I think it's not even, I'm just inclined not to argue it. I think that you can't really tell somebody that their utility function is wrong and compare it to yours.
Mhm.
You can definitely compare them, but I can't say, and mine is better. I mean, that's not exactly what I'm trying to say. I guess I'm saying is that like, I can't compare the utility that you get out of giving to local giving. I can't compare that to the utility that I get out of giving to, say, GiveDirectly, who I'm happy to say, just if it'll encourage anyone else, I gave $250 to this month, and I plan to do a regular donation to them. I had no idea that they were like, I knew they were killing it. And I actually figured out where. I was talking to my wife about it. She listened to remember some weeks ago when we were talking about having Nick on the show, and I'm like, I'm already pretty sold on GiveDirectly, and I can't remember where I heard this. It was a Clear Thinking podcast. Would have to figure out which one, but it's in there somewhere. If you just, I'm sure, search the backlog for GiveDirectly, because my wife heard it too. Anyway, that was the source where I heard it at. So I was already kind of sold on it, but I was way more sold after talking with it. The project of lifting a small country out of poverty sounds very attainable and is like the coolest fucking thing we could do. And like, as much as I love Lighthaven, I think that if I had to trade Lighthaven to do that, I think I might. And you might not. But the thing is like that, and that's just a values judgment that you and I can't square by saying, well, here's how much utility I think this is worth. And I think that's totally fine.
Are you willing to kill yourself or someone you love to lift a poor nation out of poverty?
I mean, this is getting us into the absurdity, would I kill Hitler? Would I cut off all my fingers? The dumb thought experiments.
Sure.
Like, it's impossible for me to answer that question, what I do in real life, because I haven't been presented with that situation. I would like to think that if it came down to it, in fact, any parent will tell you this, if they had to throw their life away for a chance to save their kid, they would do it for a chance.
Yeah. Their kid.
Yeah.
Right. That wasn't the question. It was to trade something they value extremely highly locally to lift a nation out of poverty. Like, would you shatter the Denver less wrong community or whatever you consider your most important social group that you really get meaning in life out of? Would you shatter that and never see those people again and make it so like they don't have a community that they can see each other through again in order to lift a small nation out of poverty, or to have a decent shot at lifting a small nation out of poverty. We don't know for sure it would work yet.
Right.
And
No,
I don't think I would, because then what is the purpose of my life anymore? Why do I exist? I guess I can go back to alcoholism because I'm depressed and I don't have a reason to live anymore. And that just doesn't seem like a sacrifice I'm willing to make.
And I brought up the parents sacrificing themselves for kids thing because that's like an actual thing that could actually happen. But like me being, in the situation where I get to die to save everybody else or to make this decision, like because that's such an impossible thing, it's not one that I'm inclined just to burn a lot of fuel thinking about.
Yeah.
Or like even really entertaining for that long. But like the short answer is I suspect if there was a meteorite coming for Earth and it would only stop if it hit you, right? Or some stupid other thought experiment, you would stand in front of it, right?
Yeah.
There's something we'd all sacrifice ourselves for. And there are, I think I looked it up, it was like 200,000 people maybe maybe it was 2 million.
Let's say 2 million.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So the Denver rationalist community is like 50 people. I would absolutely strip away the fun they get out of coming to our monthly meetups to save 2 million people. It would bum me out. I look forward to them a lot. It means a lot to me. Maybe one that would hit harder would be like, would I blow up the Guild of the Rose to do it?
Okay. Yeah. Whichever social group gives your life meaning is what I'm asking about.
I mean...
And, follow-up question, if there is no social group that gives your life meaning, then maybe that's a problem, and donating money to create or find one is worth that money.
Yeah, I mean, that could be my secret out to this, is that my secret is that, my life doesn't have any meaning and I'm already depressed, so I might as well save some lives while I'm here.
Yeah.
But no, the other side of it is, like, it's not just on me. If the amount of money that I give to the Guild of the Rose every month, if me switching that, let's be honest, pittance to GiveDirectly, if that was enough to change the lives of people over there, and in fact it is, it might be something I should consider doing, or since I'm capable of doing this, I should just double my charity budget in that department and give to both places. So I don't think that framing it in the like either or situation is the best framing for it, because it's not just on you, it's on everybody, and everybody gets to make their own value judgment, and everyone has different resources. There are some millionaires who can afford to write Lighthaven a $100,000 check and think nothing of it. And that is a life-changing amount of money for you or me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not just us sitting in front of like these two switches or these two buttons and sweating, which button do we press? It's our entire community. It's our entire planet. At the end of the day, that's kind of, I think, where I think about this going is like, I'm not trying to be tongue-in-cheek, but this sounds insincere, but I don't mean for it to be. Who knows how many rationalists there are waiting in Malawi to bring into the community if only they could.
Right.
And especially if they're saved. Saved, if their nation is lifted out of poverty to where now it's a cool place to go, it's a tourist destination, and they can afford to travel to the other parts of the world. And they were like, oh, it was these Berkeley-based nerds. Let's go check them out. Maybe we get half the country into the movement, right? We get another 100 million people. And I realize those are ridiculously inflated numbers, but like those are other considerations.
I'm going to come out and say right now, I do not want half the country in the movement. I want only the people who are already neurologically aligned to be here. Like, I want the people that our culture works for to join our culture, and not random people that don't fit as well because they're thankful.
I guess I was thinking like thankful in the kind of way where, like, if you're running with like the old church example, somebody brought me into their home and fed me while I was recovering from an illness or something, and I might be really inclined to learn about the philosophy that led them to do that, and then I get really into their religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
So about religion for rationality and a few other variables there, and that's kind of what I was getting at. So they wouldn't just be posers; they'd be like really into it. I don't think you have to be like a bullied in high school nerd to become a rationalist. Certainly, there's a correlation, but I don't think it's a necessary causal relationship.
I definitely think rationalism is not for everyone to a greater extent than Christianity. I would be shocked if even 1% of the population would fit well in rationality.
No, I agree. I don't know if this takes us too far afield, but I think that 1% of the population of the planet probably doesn't fit well into like what Christianity is according to the book, right? You grab any two Christians and ask them the basic questions and they'll disagree with each other.
Yeah.
That's kind of neither here nor there. I guess in response to like the general zoomed out question of like, what ought one to do with one's resources?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to be just like a lazy dude about it, but just whatever makes you happy, man. And I mean that in kind of every sense of the word. If spending time and money and energy helping the people around you gives you the most joy, that's awesome. And if you have time, money, and energy left over to help people that aren't near you, great. If not, that's fine.
I mean, I completely agree with you. I think this advice is fully generalizable to the entire human population in terms of like spend the money in the way that allows you to have a happy life. And I think that means spending some amount of money sacrificing for your tribe so you can feel like you have someplace that you belong and someplace that gives your life meaning. And then once you have that, then additional can go to helping out foreigners in a, strange foreign land. I'm more concerned about the people who give all of their charitable money to the people they'll never see because it's the most cost-effective way to do it, and thus neglect the part where they feel like they have a community which gives them that emotional well-being that allows them to continue to go on. The Bay Area solstice this year was very much, I felt like, leaning into the you have to be able to have a happy life first. Which I really appreciated because not having a happy life is unsustainable, and you can't keep giving money to foreign causes if you end up killing yourself or drinking yourself into a stupor every night or whatever. And that's basically what I'm trying to advocate here. I'm advocating that consider giving a lot more money to not just local causes as in nearby. Don't give money to like your local Salvation Army or your local food bank or whatever, because you probably don't know any of those people there. Give money to whatever organization you're actually in that you have social bonds with, because then you're sacrificing for people that you know and that know you. And that, I think, will give enough meaning, probably give enough meaning in life then that you can continue to give what's left over to foreign charities.
I don't think we disagree.
Okay.
I think that there's actually enough to cover here that for a whole episode. And then I remember that we already did that episode. It was the one where we argued about Eric Hole's shitty EA take.
Shit.
And so like, but really, this does just distill down to like we could make it even simpler than like your local community and just say your family, which is kind of what your local community that you're talking about. And it, they're kind of your chosen family kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I don't think family is big enough.
No, I know, but like for the sake of this argument, let's pretend it is because it makes my point faster. And so, which is to say, like one of the things that he and Russ Roberts were patting each other on the back for was talking about how dumb it was to consider not buying your son a birthday present because somebody in the third world is starving, and they thought this was some awesome knockdown argument, and it's not. The thing is like we aren't robots that can be happy just maximizing utils for random strangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't want to be those kinds of robots. Buy yourself stuff, buy your friends stuff, buy your family, buy your friends, your community, and do all that. And then with what you have left over, like as much as you need to feel good and for them to feel good, right?
No, because I don't like that phrasing, because everything that you do like that, it sounds like, yeah, buy yourself stuff and then consider what you have left over, your charitable giving. I want to very strongly push back on that and say that doing that, what you call buy yourself stuff, is what I call charitable giving, which is just as important as any of the EA stuff, if not more important. I mean, I honestly feel like maybe I owe Eric Howell an apology. I've come much closer to his point of view since then.
I think that you don't, because I think that he's mischaracterizing EA, like to an extent that is uncharitable.
Okay.
And when I said, buy your friends and family stuff, I guess I didn't mean in charity terms. I'm trying to like find a way to like keep the family analogy going, but it's derailing this. So I guess what I'm saying is like give whatever you feel like you want to your local communities to keep the part of society that you love. Do whatever you can to keep it alive, to the extent that it's not going to burn you out and kill you either, right?
And consider that part of your charitable budget.
Oh yeah, it's 100%. Yeah. Whereas like buying your son a birthday present isn't part of your charity budget. That's part of being a parent, I think. And so that's where the analogy kind of fell apart. Let's tossing that out. I can just say like give what you can, give what you want to the things that make you happy, and then if you have stuff left over, give what you can to the things that make a difference for people that maybe you'll never meet, but it'll make the world of difference to them.
All right, let me give a quick, concrete example. You know the Internet Archive, right?
No.
Oh, the Internet Archive is an amazing organization that basically archives the entire internet as much as it is possible to do so.
Oh, yeah, like the Wayback Machine kind of thing.
Yeah, they run the Wayback Machine.
Okay, cool, yeah.
Yeah, they're awesome. They actually have physical offices in the Bay Area. I have not gone to visit them yet. I want to. I want to actually set up a whole group excursion to there at some point, because they have a small museum that is open to the public, I think, one day a week. In that small museum, among other things, other physical artifacts like some of the earliest typeset books or whatever, they have wooden statues that I think are 4 feet tall or so, hand carved by someone, of people that were important to the Internet Archive, of like the founders of the Internet Archive, of some of the people who gave a lot of time and money to the Internet Archive, of some of the early programmers of it. I think that's freaking awesome. The organization exists because of those people, right? They are literally the organs that made it run at first, and some of these people are still around, still making it run. It would not exist without them. I would say any amount of money that one spends in order to get a wooden statue of someone in your community carved that has done big things for your community and keep it somewhere in a public place that people can come and visit absolutely counts just as much as every dollar you spend for AMF or GiveDirectly as a good, effective charity. Because these are the sorts of things that make a community strong and proud and keeps people together and keeps people going. I think that a lot of EAs would say, no, you carved a wooden statue of someone. That does not count the same as deworming someone or preventing malaria. And in my opinion, that's just wrong. It counts just as much.
I think I'll just have to kind of defer back to that being a values difference. And I mean, not to like be ridiculously reductive about it, but like if you were dying of an illness that somebody with $1,000 could solve, but instead of solving it, they built a statue of you. You'd probably be like, man, I really wish you'd bought me medicine instead.
Yeah, that way lies a society with no statues and no art and no community of any kind.
No, I mean, like in the actual instance where like you're actually where you are in desperate need. At some point, I think even you would be like, no, the statue is a nice gesture, but can I please have the drugs instead? The drugs that will save my life. And then I will earn that statue. But I think I'm getting too lost into the weeds there. Like, I totally get where you're coming from. I think that it is just it's a values difference that I don't think I can argue you out of, nor am I inclined to. I think that it's your preference, and your preferences there are aligned enough with, I think, a sane and safe and good society, as opposed to like, say, bulletproof vests for police dogs, that I think that is a good use of money. And how good a use of money is up to you. And you and I have different weights that we put on those things. Like you gave, I think, 10 times what I gave to Lighthaven to keep it going when it did its fundraiser.
Which was a significant chunk of my annual budget too. Yeah. I guess my annual income rather than annual budget, but you know what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, I'm glad it's there. I'm glad it's there for the amount that I gave to it. And I just assumed that other people would give it money.
When you bring up the money for the drugs that'll save my life, I would expect that would be much more likely to come from my family or from my community.
Which, if you hadn't been fostering this whole time, no one would be there to give it to you.
Yeah, exactly. That, yeah. Someone in India, like a billionaire in India, I would not expect him to give me money for life-saving drugs. And if he was building a statue to honor someone in his community from a century ago that allowed his community to thrive and allowed him to eventually rise to his position, I would not be like, why are you building that statue instead of giving me money for drugs that will save my life? I think that's a bullshit argument. But I would expect him that he would give money for drugs for someone in his community that really needed them. I kind of feel the same what things should apply in this case, where a community takes care of its own first, and then if they want to use that money for a statue to keep their community strong and healthy, that's like life-saving drugs for the community. And that's important. And I don't think that saving a random person on the other side of the world is necessarily a better use of that money than keeping the culture healthy.
When you say, can you remind me? It was like your community, giving drugs to people in your community.
Yeah. The billionaire Pakistani should give money for life-saving drugs in his community, and then he should build a statue to the ancestors that helped his community thrive before he gives money to me for my drugs to save my life.
Right. Okay, yes. I think I can make most of the point I'm trying to think of, which is that it's how you define your community in this case then. For some people, it encompasses a broader circle than those people just near and dear. It's not a dig on people, who care about that sort of thing. That's how we're wired. That's how we care about people. Like for some people, they have an inclination that when they can to expand that sphere of moral consideration to people further out. And this is making it sound like I'm like being high and mighty about it, but I'm not. In the analogy, in the way that I'm trying to drive this home is that, like, to me, my community is humanity. I actually do want everybody to have a thriving life. And, like I gave money to Lighthaven. I met some people there, right?
Yeah.
But I like to go back. It was fun, but I'm not close with that physical location and the people that stay there, or the people that visit there. I mean, I am with some of them, as you were there, but I think I'm more like highfalutinly ambitious / I don't know, idealistic, in that the community example that we're talking about, it's like, yes, let's give statues to people that we care about, and drugs to the people and life-saving drugs to the people we care about. I'm thinking that for some people that your community can be wider than the people that are near and dear to you. And I realize that maybe is a different goalpost than the one that you set up, which is like the people that are actually maintaining your actual society / community that you care about, that you're in.
Yeah.
But part of me thinks that like all of humanity is in some sense part of a global society, and we've got to work together on it.
In some sense, yes, we are absolutely all part of a global society. I'm sure we all want all of humanity to thrive. Actually, I'm not sure about that, but at the very least, I think all rationalists want all humanity to thrive, and most people in the Western world want all of humanity to thrive. As I was saying, it is good to give some money to foreign charitable causes. I just think not counting the money that you give to your personal community to do things like statues as part of that equally strong charitable giving is a mistake. I'm just going to come out and say, like, if someone says the entire world is my community, in my opinion, they're just not using the word community correctly.
I realized that as I was saying it, that I was using it differently than you were.
Yeah.
It's just, I think idealistically, that's what I'd like to think, and that's the kind of person I want to be and the kind of world I want to live in. So I'm going to try to make that the world I'm going to try to make that the world I live in.
So like if an effective altruist wants to give 10% of all income to charity, then they should absolutely give 10 to 20% of that 10% to distant foreign causes, but strongly consider giving 80% of it to local causes, because that's just as valid a charity. And if they want to like keep giving 10% to foreign causes, then maybe consider giving 20% of your income to charity instead of 10%. If you were already giving 10% locally to your community, then, good. Just start saying that I give 20% of my income to effective charities, and call that 10% that previously that you weren't counting when you were giving it to the local rationalist movement or to your local sewing group or whatever it is, and you weren't counting that as effective. Start counting it as effective now, because that is supporting yourself, that is supporting your community, which is what allows you to give 10% to the foreign people as it is. It is part of that vital pipeline and also counts as your effective giving.
All right, I'm on board with 90% of that, but I think that as I unintentionally shifted the goalposts with redefining community, you can't redefine effective that way. To say, oh no, your local movie hobbyist group is just as valuable as any life of a random stranger in the third world, or as valuable as 10 of their lives. People who argue for effective altruism would draw contention with that. So I think that you're trying to change their minds.
So you say local movie hobbyist group. If it's really just a movie hobbyist group, then I agree with you. That's not considered effective, because that's not what sustains your life. That's not the community. Like, what I want to keep saying, and I'm not saying, is like your church group, the people who look out for each other and who keep each other alive when times are tough and who give your life meaning. And that probably isn't your local movie hobbyist group. But back in the day, I bet a lot of church groups did get together and watch movies together as part of the thing that they did to build their community. So like, somehow that would get wrapped up. I strongly doubt that your local movie hobbyist group gives your life meaning in that way, in the same way that a thick community of people who raise children together and have been bound together for many generations counts. I don't think any local movie hobbyist group has been bound together across generations with blood ties and intermarriage and, pursuing local goals.
That's fair. I chose a weak example, and I shouldn't have, because I should have stuck to the kinds that you gave, and that's fine. But I don't think that actually takes apart my general point.
The worst part is that a lot of people in the modern world that I'm used to interacting with don't have a group like that at all. They wouldn't have anywhere to give that kind of money, and that really sucks. And maybe a lot of people could start considering, what group can I join or what group can I help build that can use this 7-8% of people's income that they're willing to give to build a place that gives meaning to their lives. Because I think that would be a much more valuable project than what most people are doing and struggling with lack of meaning in their lives.
You might be onto something there. I think this does just boil down to the individual person and what they feel like doing. I don't think for one second that you're like a worse person than me because we have different priorities. Not even a little. I'm not even just saying that to be nice. Like, that's genuinely how I feel.
And same.
And oh, good. Well, so I mean, then I think that it's just a matter of like where our priorities are. Like, part of what giving to a local community does is like not just perpetuate that community, but it also makes you happy. Like you said, there's some selfish aspects to it, and there's nothing wrong with that kind of selfishness. In a way, giving to distant people who are that I'll never meet satisfies that selfish urge that I have, which is to feel like a hero.
Yeah.
I don't have a magic hammer, so this is the closest I get to do, right?
I think one of the greatest aspects of that sort of effective giving to faraway communities and lifting entire countries out of poverty, one of the most important things about that is then you get to say, we as a community did this together. We lifted Malawi out of poverty. We stopped malaria from killing this many people. And I do think there needs to be that we first. And a lot of people don't have that we, and that sucks. But once there is that we, and that we is sustainable, then saying this is what we did is fucking huge.
I agree. I think I'm on board with all of that. Speaking of we, are we plugging? Is this still the section where we're plugging the Guild of the Rose?
Let's plug the Guild of the Rose.
All right. Speaking of us and our community, I mentioned the Guild several times, not just because they're on my mind and I gave them some money recently. I actually give them some small amount of money every month, but I give them more. They are an example of the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
It is part of my community in the important sense, capital C community. And they have a mission that I align with. I think exactly like what the kind of thing you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, what is that mission, Eneasz?
That mission is to raise the sanity waterline and help rationalists to improve their rationality skills.
Yeah, their goal is to help people make their lives better through every avenue, whether, spiritually, intellectually, physically, and the fourth one, I can't think of on the skill tree. Emotionally, probably. Check out theguildoftherose.org. Check out their skill tree. So, I mean, not only is it like a lot of fun and it's gamified in that way, but you make lasting friends. You make the kind of connections that Eneasz and I are talking about. The kind of people that you want to support, and the kind of people that will support you. As culty as that sounds, but at some point when you get a cool enough community, it just sounds culty. So I don't think there's a way to dodge that bullet, except for saying that no one here is demanding that anyone drink Kool-Aid. Right. So check out the Guild of the Rose. They are great. And if you like what we're doing here, they are doing it in a more systematized way that'll actually like one critique that we've received on the podcast over the almost 8 years we've been doing this is that we do very little like practical advice of how do I apply rationality skills. I think that's because partly it's just not it's not our exact wheelhouse, but B, it's not great audio content. Like there's only so much for us to say that you and I could think of, but you've got lots of instructors at the Guild of the Rose. In fact, you can be one if you come up with a good course and people want to go to it. And so that is exactly if you were looking for those applicable skills, that's where to go.
Yeah. So check out guildoftheRose.org or link in the show notes.
That's right.
And if you have some money afterwards, as part of your 40-40-20 or however else you want to split these things, I don't even know what category you would put us in, but you can consider getting a subscription to the Bayesian Conspiracy and helping us continue to produce this content and bring it to the earholes, earbuds, and headphones of all our listeners. Who is the specific person that is helping us out this fortnight, Steven?
Special shout out this week to John Doe 7776059. You fucking rock. And we owe you one. Thanks a lot.
Hell yeah. Thank you. I don't know. What can I say? You're wonderful. You're helping the community grow. You're helping all of us feel like we're part of one big thing.
We really like doing this thing for our community, and it means a lot that people like you support us. It does make it feel like more of a real thing that real people actually find value in. So thank you.
All right. That was great. Thank you for joining me, Steven. I'll see you again in 2 weeks.
Sounds great. Thanks, Eneasz.
Bye.